Okay, hello. In this video, I'll basically just be going over how to make this water shader. It's pretty simple, nothing too crazy. But yeah, let's get started. The first thing you're gonna want to do is import in the textures that I think should be in the Discord channel for you to look at. Just go to the Google Drive link, download textures, and you can just like select all the textures and physically drag them in. That's all you have to do. And then you'll get your textures like this. I have more textures than needed, but just those other textures should be good enough. So the shaders that we're going to be making, and pretty much anything that has color or textures inside of Unreal, has them placed inside of material. And the way you make materials is you right click inside your content browser. Also, if you don't have a content browser by default when you open it up, you click right here. This brings up the content browser, and then you can dock it and lay out like that. But yeah, going back to materials, you right click, you click on material, and then you can name it whatever you want, but the naming convention in Unreal is M for if it's just a one-off material, or MM if it's a master material that you'll be making instance or material instances of later, such as this one, and then you can name it whatever you want. I already made this shader, so here it is. I'll be walking you through how to get all these nodes and then what kind of all these different sections within the color, the normal, and the displacement actually do. But first, we need to get the plane that we're going to be putting the water shader on. We need to actually get it to be something that can be displaced, like, because we have a displacement map for the water, and the displacement won't work on anything. We need something that has been subdivided a lot. So we can actually make that inside of Unreal. They have this modeling mode, which you can come into right here. Inside the create, you're going to click box. You will actually get a box, which is what you should be getting. But so you just click on the box, place it, and the settings you'll want to change are the subdivision settings. Set all three of these to 64. Max out the width and depth, and then set the height to 1. After you've done that, you can press accept. And from there, you can just drag this into the scene, press R to scale, and then scale it up with your mouse, or physically scale it inside of the details panel. But now going back to the shader, the first thing you have to do, which is the important thing to do, is to change the shading model into the single layer water. Otherwise, the shader just will not look right. So make sure you come here, select the select down, shading model, make sure you single layer water. To start off with, we can go over some of these like one-off inputs. Base color is a race color, and so to get this parameter, what you want to do is search for constant or constant for vector, and then you can right-click this, then convert to parameter, and then you want to name it something like base color, in our case water color, right? That's how you would get that. Or another thing you could do is hold 4 and then right click, and you would get the same thing. It's just a keyboard shortcut. So after you have this node, you can set it to whatever color you want. I just have mine set to some shade of blue, and then you drag it in and base it into base color. The metallic you want to have set to 0, and then the reference you also want to have set to 0. For the opacity, this is something we want to be able to control later down the line. So in order to be able to control it when we're not inside the material, you want to use something called a scalar, which basically is just like a parameter, right? So you can just type in scalar, scalar parameter, and then same thing, you can name it whatever you want, or you can hold down S and then left click, and then you also get it as well. That's for the opacity. For the ambient inclusion, we want to use a texture that we got earlier, the OCC. You can just drag it in here and then plug it into RGB, or plug this RGB into ambient occlusion. The refraction. So this is something that I think by default should be disabled for you guys. The way you get that back is by going back into this menu, and the way you get it back here real quick, if in the case of somebody's confused, if you have something selected, it'll tell you the details for that. Just click anywhere in the graph and it'll give you the details for the material itself. So out of here you want to search refraction, and for the refraction method, by default it should be set to none, but we want the index refraction. turning that on should enable this. And then like you made a scalar parameter here, you want to make another one for the refraction. And for the refraction, you want to set it to a value of 1.33. And the reason why it's such a specific number is because that is the refraction of water in real life. If you want like water that's more stylized, then you could turn this, lower this value closer to 1. That would give you more stylized water. Or if you want something that's like insanely reflective for whatever reason, then you could have it be a value of greater than 1.33. So now going into this little section over here, because we're using a single layer water material, the way you get this node is, also the way I've been bringing up this menu, I should have mentioned earlier, is you right click inside the shader graph. So you right click, bring it up, insert single layer water, material output, then you'll get this. Something to note is when you have nothing plugged in, or like now, you'll get a bunch of warnings. It's fine, ignore it, you don't have to worry about it. As for actually plugging these values in here, same thing as in here, you want to get the 4 constant. Want to get the 4 vector constant, convert it into parameter, and then you get the refraction color. And then also make a scalar parameter called the water opacity, set its default value to 3, and then same thing, you just search for multiply. Multiply, you can get that. Or if you want the keyboard shortcut, you can press M and then left click, and then also bring up multiply. Multiply the RGB from the refraction color and then the value from the water opacity together, and then you want to get a divide node, which you just search divide, put that in, plug the output of the multiply into the A value, and then for the B value, make sure to set it to 100. So what all this is doing, or the best way to kind of understand this is controlling how far the light penetrates into the water. Higher values make the water much more shallow appearing, or like almost swamp-like, where the light won't penetrate that far into it, and getting values that are much closer to 0 will give you water where the light actually penetrates a lot further into the water. And I can show you that in effect really quick. So right now we have the water opacity set to 5, or now it's set to 5, right? So the light isn't actually penetrating the water very much, so it's not very, so it looks like very shallow and very like thick, swampy kind of water, right? If I set the water opacity to 1, then you get the light actually penetrating through the water all the way to the ground floor, and then you get much more, what's the word? Realistic looking water, I guess is the word. But yeah. If you want more realistic water, then your water opacity value should be pretty low. And if you want more stylized, then it can kind of lean towards more of the higher ranges. But going back to the shader. The next section is the normal maps. It seems more complicated than anything else, but it's very, very simple. You want to get your texture coordinates, which you just bring up the menu again, type in texture coord, and you'll get this. Bring in another multiply node as earlier, and then bring in a scalar parameter, and then name it normal tiling. Set its default value to 1, which is important because you don't want the tiling to be set to 0 by default, so make sure you set the default value for it to be 1. And then want to get panner nodes. Same thing, you can just bring up the menu and then search for it. The panner nodes, basically what they do is they just animate the texture. So like you have your X and your Y. This is just moving this texture like across the object's Y axis at this speed, right? And same thing with this one. The reason why we have 2 of these and we're using 2 normal textures, which they're the same exact texture, is because if you only used 1, you would see very quickly that it's just a texture that's constantly repeating, right? And that would get very boring to look at. This kind of helps it a little bit, gives it a lot more depth and richness, and it's not the exact same thing repeating over and over again. Not a great solution. If you look at it for a good amount of time, you'll kind of see it, right? Not a good solution, but for the purposes of like a beginner basic shader, it works perfectly fine. There's better ways to do this later on, right? So you get the 2 parameters, or you get the 2 panners put in the coordinates from the multiplier you had earlier. A good speed for this one is negative 0.01. A good speed for 0.03 for the bottom one. You multiply them together, and then you bring those into the normal map. And also the way you get the normal map in here is when you're inside the texture, this one, you just drag it in here. And the way that I keep bringing up that menu over and over again is by control spacebar. So yeah, but if you don't want to do that, then the other way to do it inside the actual material node is you search up texture sample, and then from here you can search all your textures and get it that way as well. But yeah, that is the normal map. And the final part of it is the displacement, which is very similar to this. The beginning part is very similar. You have your texture coordinate, you have your scale parameter, which is your displacement tiling, and then multiply them together, you have your single panel node for the actual displacement texture. You can set this to 1 for the most part, or you can set it to 0. I found that I like at 0, but later down the line I'll show you how you can experiment on different values, but 0 is a good default value for it. From this texture, I'm going to bring in another multiply the RGB texture to it, which again, the shortcut for it is you hold M and then left click, or you can switch it up. This one, so the vertex normals, you want to bring up the menu again, search in vertex normal, yes, you'll get it. This basically just takes the vertex normals of whatever object you're going to be putting the shader on, and then we're just multiplying it with this displacement map as well as the panel that we have, right? And so then the vertex normals get multiplied with this displacement map logic here, and then all of this gets input into the world position offset node. And that is the entire shader. Very simple. It's a great first water shader, but you can go much more in depth. I made this in I think like 5 minutes. I've spent like 2 hours on more complicated ones, and people have spent months and months getting like very complicated systems. So water shaders are great because you don't need to put in a lot to get something that looks like water. But if you really did want to, you could spend months just making more and more systems to make it more and more, water at the end of the day. So you'll have your plane. The way that you actually get the material onto a plane, because you guys will probably just have a plane like this, is you take your material and then drag it onto the plane. This is probably what you guys will look like because you only have the water material right now, but this doesn't look like what I had earlier, right? So this is where material instances come in, and they're very important, so I'm going to set this back to normal. You want to right click on the actual material itself, and then at the top you'll see this option to create a material instance. You want to click on that. I already have one. There is naming conventions for this, which the naming proper naming convention is MMI, so mass, or MI, so material instance underscore water underscore 0102, because you'll end up making a lot of these instances, right? But I already have mine, so I'll delete it, and I'll put this back, and this is the more closer to what the water had before was, right? And you can see when you open up the water, the instance itself, it is very it's a lot easier to edit everything inside of it. This wrong thing. Yeah. So this is, the material instances are primarily for your designers or other artists that are coming in and setting up your shaders. So it's very important. This is the reason why you want to have scalers, right? Because if you're a designer that's to come in and set up the water shader to match what like the level is supposed to be, right? You don't want your level, or you don't want your designers to have to go into your actual shader and then figure out like, oh, this is the value that's gonna do this, right? This value that's gonna do this. You want to make a material instance for them, which just has only the value set out with the naming, so it's very easy for them to tell like exactly what each thing is gonna do, right? The values that I like, I can just set this all back to default. So with the water opacity, as I mentioned earlier, that's just how much light is going to be penetrating, right? So I set this to 1, and get much more light to penetrate through. Yeah, like that. But yeah, I like mine on the higher end because it gives it a more stylized look. The refraction, you can turn this down and it'll give you a more stylized look as well. But I'm going to keep it at 1.33. The opacity is the actual opacity of the shader. 0.5 is a good value for that. The normal tiling you can mess around with a little bit. The larger number you put, the more slower and less detailed the water. It'll just basically make the waves a lot smaller. So the best way you can think of normal tiling setting is like how big do you want your waves to be, right? A very high number gives you extremely small, tiny waves, like this is right here. Default value of 1 gives you decent waves. If you want to go like 0.1, then you get pretty big waves, but because it's just a plane, the waves don't actually appear that big. So for this, I think like a value of 0.8 is pretty good. Displacement speed, you can put this to like 10 if you want. Not really, doesn't really do much. It will just give it like a little bit of jitter as you see there. I don't really see any pointers, so I have it set to 0. And then the displacement intensity, you can kind of go crazy with it if you want. I think 10 is a fine number for that. So sometimes you could do like 20, right? Yeah, but all these settings are exposed. I would play around with it, kind of get the sense, like make it your own kind of deal, right? Because you can either end up with like super realistic water or super stylized. And also for the colors, it's important. You kind of want to match the refraction color with the watercolor, because otherwise you'll get, like if I do something like this, you'll get something a little bit weird. Or because I have the refraction set to low. But generally you want to match the refraction colors together, get practice. But you could really make it whatever color you want. But yeah, that should be everything for this.